Imagine a world where the greatest legends of rock and roll are more than just stories, but rather secrets buried beneath decades of false starts, forgotten names, and whispered conspiracies. Let's explore the lies, half-truths, and forgotten corners of pop culture, and where every clue might upend everything you thought you knew about your heroes, here on Things Visible and Invisible. Jim Berkenstadt is a best-selling author, producer, music historian and consultant who has documented the lives and the legends of several rock and roll musicians. He is the founder of the firm Rock and Roll Detective, which provides consulting services to the entertainment industry. Recently credited for his work on the Beatles documentary Get Back. He is also the author of Mysteries in Music, Case Closed. He joins me down the line from his home in Wisconsin. Jim, welcome back to Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you very much for having me on, Seán. It's a real pleasure to be back on your program.
Now, the last time we spoke, you gave the very salutary tale of Jimmy Nicol and his dalliances with the supergroup, the Beatles. And it was a sort of Greek tragedy by the end of that. Your book, Mysteries in Music, has many, many other fascinating tales. So where shall we start tonight, Jim?
Well, maybe I should just start by giving an overview very quickly, and that is that I found a number of mysteries that I thought have never been cleared up. There are a lot of conspiracies. Now that we have social media, there are blogs, YouTube, social media websites where people opine on these things without gathering any evidence. And so what I wanted to do was once and for all clear up some of pop music's biggest mysteries, myths, legends, and conspiracies. And each chapter unfolds like a detective story to lead you to the results of what really happened all those years ago. So I thought maybe, first of all, we might want to talk about the case of the masked Marauders, which was either a supergroup or a masquerade ball.
Well, you have the advantage of me, Jim, because I thought I knew a lot about rock and roll history, but I've never heard of these masked Marauders. So we better start at the beginning. What year are we talking about?
Talking about 1969, and it became a rather weird year for rock and roll music because looking back, there were some landmark moments that were just very strange. For example, the Rolling Stones played a free concert at Altamont Racetrack, and there was a murder right in front of the stage. A person was stabbed. The Rolling Stones foolishly hired a motorcycle gang, I think it was the Hells Angels, to protect them, and a murder took place. Then you had this amazing Woodstock concert that was like an entire generation went out to Max Yasgur's farm to watch concerts for 3 days in the rain and the mud, and it was quite an interesting sociological experiment as well as the first huge concert event. You had the Paul is dead conspiracy theory in the fall of 1969, where something spread from a small story in a school university newspaper. It suddenly became in America a national story, and then that story spread around the world, where people thought Paul McCartney was dead, and they were looking at clues on the albums. And then you had Charles Manson, who was in Los Angeles, and he had formed a cult. He had become friends with Dennis Wilson. We'll maybe talk about that later. And then ended up, murdering innocent people based on a very weird concept of a coming race war. But finally, what was very interesting to me in 1969 was the formation of supergroups. And, we had we had Cream, we had Crosby, Stills, Nash, followed by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. There were just a lot of groups starting to collaborate, or people starting to collaborate from different groups with each other. Then there was Blind Faith and such. So that fall of '69, Rolling Stone magazine uh, had a regular record review section. And on it, there was a new LP that was called The Masked Marauders. And it talked about Bob Dylan, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones getting together to record the greatest supergroup of all time. So the questions are, did it really happen? Was it a hoax? Was the story or myth actually based in reality? And so I had to dig in and find out. And one of the things I did, so I think that the questions I had were, did this album really happen? Some people think it happened, some people don't. Was it a hoax? Was the story or myth actually based in reality? That was something that in the years past, I had never considered. Was it something that started out as real and then later was thought to be a hoax? So I interviewed Jan Wenner, the founding editor of Rolling Stone magazine. Very interesting gentleman. According to the record review, Al Cooper, who had played with Bob Dylan at that time as a keyboard player, he was said to be the producer of this album that was supposed to have been made up in a very remote part of Canada in 1969. I also interviewed Glyn Johns, who had already worked with the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, and more. And it was just an interesting, time. And I thought, well, anything was possible. Would they have made this album or recorded and then decided maybe, well, we don't think it's good enough, or we should have had Charlie Watts instead of Ringo Starr. I thought of all these possibilities. So it was a really interesting. I don't want to give away the ending, but it was a very interesting search. And it also involved, one of the things I did was I had to create a timeline, because if this album was recorded in 1969, I needed to find out where was Bob Dylan, where were the Beatles, and where were the Rolling Stones, and what were they doing in 1969? Was there ever a moment where they weren't, say, in the studio or playing live or something, where, it was even just a few days where the three groups could have been in one place in Canada? And so it was that took a while, because I think more things nowadays are kept track of online when it comes to rock bands and things, and diaries of day-to-day movements weren't as common back in '69.
No, but that said, Jim, even today, the documentation of the Beatles almost day by day, it's never been easier to work out what they have done. There's even YouTube channels now dedicated to monthly dissections of their movements, which gigs they were playing. The other thing is that with all these major artists, they had very, very strict timetables, schedules, because they were recording, they were touring. There wasn't an awful lot of free time, contrary to sort of the myth around music that rock stars are simply partying all the time. The really successful ones, as you know better than I, are very, very hard working. So perhaps it's not so difficult to trace that down. Now, I know you don't want to give away the ending, and I'm not going to push you for that, but so what we have here is a review in Rolling Stones, which was the great Bible of that era. Everything that was in Rolling Stone was the gospel
Very well
of
respected.
absolutely, and for many years afterwards. So we had a review of an album by this Masked Marauders, which even the name sounds like some sort of in joke, right? It sounds like something a super group would probably do. So Is there any evidence, though, that this album existed? Are you able to tell us that there's actually?
Yeah, there's a few things I can tell you without giving it away. One that I found very interesting was Alan Klein at the time was representing the Rolling Stones as a manager, and when he read the issue, he immediately called Jan Wenner to say, how come I don't know about this? When did this happen? And, he wanted all the details. And the other thing, besides people calling in to a Rolling Stone asking for more detail, many, many, many thousands of Americans, anyway, I can only speak to that, started going to their local record stores saying, when is this record going to come out?
Absolutely.
Jan Wenner told me a very interesting story. He said that he and Glyn Johns were flying into New York Airport. I don't know if it was the Kennedy Airport, but they flew into New York, and when they came out of the stairwell or whatever and came into just the normal area of the airport, they ran into Bob Dylan. And he was just sort of leaning against a pillar, observing people, which I thought was kind of interesting. And Jan said that he had recently interviewed Bob Dylan for the first time, and had found it really exciting. And, it had been a well-received interview in their magazine. So he went over there and introduced Glyn Johns to Bob Dylan to Glyn Johns. And Glyn said that, Bob was very complimentary of the things that he had recorded with the Beatles, the Stones, and Led Zeppelin, because he had heard some of that. And of course, Glyn was very complimentary of, how much he appreciated Bob Dylan's music.
Sure.
And then Bob Dylan said to Glyn Johns, do you think you could speak with members of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and see if they would like to join me in forming a supergroup? And so he went off to do that, and that's all I can tell you.
Okay. Well, look,
very interesting chapter.
People are going to have to buy Mysteries in Music, Case Closed, by our guest to find out what happens next. But just zeroing out a little bit from it, because you started, Jim, with 1969 and the various. I mean, it was a kind of. I was going to say high point, low point, depending on your point of view of sort of rock music in that era with all that happened. A sort of seismic moment in many, many respects. Do you, have you come across other evidence of these kind of pranks, public pranks being played by musicians? I mean, we have, for example, the knowledge that the Beatles often had in-jokes in their music, in their records. There was, if you played it this way or that way. There's the endless talk about backmasking, which is essentially, which people will know about. Was there other evidence of people appearing on stage under assumed names or teaming up for one-off gigs, pretending to be somebody they're not?
Yes, I think I covered that in the chapter, as well as other things going on, like early on, Paul McCartney used a pseudonym to write a single, hopefully a hit single, for Peter and Gordon over in England. And the reason he used the pseudonym was because he didn't want his name and fame to just have this record go up the charts for Peter and Gordon. He wanted to see if he could write a good song and that it would go up the charts on its own merit, not because it said composed by Paul McCartney. And so I wouldn't call that a prank, but I would call it pseudonyms. And there were many times where, a couple times where the Beatles used pseudonyms early on. Well, not early on, but before they broke up. And then there were a lot of times afterwards where they used pseudonyms. And a lot of the pseudonyms going on at the time were because lawyers for record labels didn't have a way to figure out how to share artists with other labels. And so your contract said you had to exclusively record with your label. So, for example, when Eric Clapton was invited by George Harrison to play the lead on While My Guitar Gently Weeps in 1968 for the Beatles' White Album, he wasn't even named at all. He hadn't even come up, or no one had thought about the pseudonym at that time, but it's left blank. And then years later, it became known that it wasn't George that recorded the solo, it was Eric Clapton. So there's an early example where, again, he wasn't allowed to record for another label, but he did it anyway. And the Beatles also, for example, George returned the favor playing and helping write the song Badge, which was a big hit for Cream.
That's right.
So, and also I would say that, the Paul is dead thing wasn't something that, based on my research, wasn't something that Paul or the Beatles planned. It was something that kids doing drugs and sitting around and listening to music back then were interpreting and coming up with their own ideas. Like the fact that Paul's barefoot on the cover of Abbey Road does not mean he's dead. It did to them at the time because they did some research into past history and found that some people were buried barefoot, things like that. And again, I wouldn't say that this was a prank caused by these artists in this chapter. I think Bob Dylan was truly interested in the idea when he asked Glyn Johns to on his behalf ask the others if they would like to participate.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of this episode, Jim. So if anybody wants to find out the denouement of the masked Marauders and who was behind it and what it ultimately means, then they better pick up a copy of your book. Tell people where they can find out more about you, and indeed pick up a copy of Mysteries in Music, Case Closed.
Right. So that book and my others are available at amazon.co.uk, I believe, or amazon.com. What's the UK address?
Just either or.
Either or. If you're in England, it's Amazon. If you're in America or anywhere in the world, they're on Amazon. Mysteries in the Music, Case Closed, and Jim Berkenstadt. You can also search by that and see my other books. Also, if you just want to understand a history about my research and my work for record labels, for the Beatles, for George Harrison, work on documentaries, you can go to www.rockandrolldetective.com.
For now, Jim, thank you so much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.